you get in?
So actually, I got into Minnesota yesterday, but I was in Canada for about a week before that, so time adjusted, which is helpful. Yeah, I have an aunt and uncle in Calgary and then a bunch of cousins in Edmonton, and we're kind of all over here, but nice to see them.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just do it.
Yeah. So much.
No, I'm really happy to have you here. Yeah. Yeah, folks, I'd like to just, yeah, no, I'm happy to have you here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna start with a couple Sufi poems that have been set to music, as they often are. This first one is known as Ji Chahe To, but it's actually two poems that people will pair together, and I think it's really interesting because the two poets, there's about 70 years between one of them's death and the other one's birth. So these poets never lived together, but it's become a custom that these two poems are paired together. And so it starts with the first one, talking about the festival of colors and how from all these colors that are flying through the air emerges a single one, which is the divine. And then the poem goes on to say, you know, why be a wine glass when you could be the whole pitcher? And why do this when you could, and it goes through kind of all these things and ends up with, why would you do all these things when you could become one with the divine? Hori ho re rahi hai Ahmad jiyo ke dwar Hori ho re rahi hai Ahmad jiyo ke dwar Hazrat Ali ka rang bana hai Hazrat Ali ka rang bana hai Hasan Hussain खिलार हरि हो रे रही है अहमद जियो के द्वार ए सोहरी की धूम मची है ए सोहरी की धूम मची है चारों ओर पड़ी है पुकार हरि हो रे रही है अहमद जियो के द्वार ए सोनो को चित्री खिलाड़ी छत्री खिलाड़ी रंग दीन्यो संसार न्याज प्यारा भर भर छिड़के न्याज प्यारा भर भर छिड़के एक ही रंग से हंस पिचकार मोरी हो रह रही है अहमद जियो के द्वार। जी चाहे तो शीशा बन जा, जी चाहे पैमाना बन जा, जी चाहे तो शीशा बन जा, जी चाहे पैमाना बन जा। शीशा पैमाना क्या बनना, मैं बन जा, मैं खाना बन जा, मैं बनकर, मैं खाना बनकर, मस्ती का फसाना बनकर, मस्ती का फसाना बनकर, हस्ती से बेगाना बन जा, हस्ती से बेगाना होना, मस्ती का फसाना बनना। इस होने से, इस बने से अच्छा है दीवाना बन जा, दीवाना बन जाने से भी दीवाना होना अच्छा है, दीवाना बन जाने से भी दीवाना होना अच्छा है, दीवाना होने से अच्छा खा के धरे जाना ना बन जा, खा के धरे जाना ना क्या है, अहले दिल की आँख कसूरमा, शमा के दिल की ठंडक बन जा, नूरे दिल परवाना बन जा। सीख ज़हीन के दिल से जलना, सीख ज़हीन के दिल से जलना, काहे को हर शम्मा पे जलना, अपनी आग में खुद जल जाए, तू ऐसा परवाना बन जा। And this instrument that I'm playing is called a Shruti box, and it uses the same technology as the organ that's behind you all, a pump and bellows system. It's a really fun little box. So this next piece is another Sufi poem called Ishq Mein Tere, and it repeats the line, Joho Soho, saying, what happens will happen, come what may. And it's about this idea of sacrificing yourself to what the universe has in store for you. Ishq mein tere ko hai gham, sar pe liya jo ho so, ishq mein tere ko hai gham, sar pe liya jo ho so, ऐशो निशात जिंदगी इश्क में तेरे को है गम अक्ल के मदरसे से उठ इश्क के में कदे में आ अक्ल के मदरसे से उठ इश्क के में कदे में आ जामे फना बेखुदी अब तो पिया जो सो इश्क में तेरे को है गम हिज्र की जो मुसीबतें अर्ज़ की उस रूबरू हिज्र की जो मुसीबतें अर्ज़ की उस रूबरू नाज़ो अदा से मुस्कुरा कहने लगा जो हो सो नाज़ो अदा से मुस्कुरा कहने लगा जो हो सो इश्क में तेरे को है गम अब तो पिया जो हो सो इश्क में तेरे को है गम
Welcome to Unity Church-Unitarian. We are so glad you're here. Whether watching us online or in person, we are delighted you found your way to this community, a place that helps you keep your balance, a place that inspires you to lead a life of integrity, service, and joy. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whether here in person or watching us online, your gifts and your wounds are welcome here. I'm Sara Ford, pronouns she, her, and I'm glad to be joined by Worship Associate Betsy Hearn, she, they. Betsy and I look forward to greeting you after the service. Our church is a vibrant community, and much of what's happening after today's service and in the weeks ahead can be found in the insert in your order of service this week at Unity. After today's service, please join us in the parish hall for coffee, tea, and conversation. And we have a few announcements this morning. If you'd like to attend Finding Yourself at Unity, our weekly class for newcomers and inquirers, the conversation will take place today at 11:15 upstairs in the Gannett room on the second floor. This week, the class topic is religious education for children, youth, and adults. Hallie Q. Brown Community Center, our food shelf partner, is hosting a school supply drive during the month of August. Please bring new school supplies to church and leave them in the food shelf baskets located at both the Portland and the Holly Avenue entrances. Our wonderful volunteers will deliver the school supplies each week, along with your food donations. Thank you for your ongoing support of families in our community. And thirdly, the Reverend Dr. Oscar Sinclair is in the house. can't see where he is, but I invite him to come and say hello. He's in the house.
Well, good morning, everybody. I have no idea what was just said. So I'm Oscar Sinclair. I'm here. It is August. I've officially started work. I am on the church website. So is my email if you want to get in contact with me. There is a formal welcome event, I think, on August 18th. And then I will start preaching at Merging of the Waters on September 8th. In the meantime, I'm really excited to just be here and worship with you this morning. I'm so excited to hear what Sara and Betsy have put together this morning. We have figured out how to put our child in religious education out in the garden. That's why I was running in here. Thank you so much. It is so good to be here.
We are so glad you are here. And we will now pause to center ourselves with the ringing of the bell.
The following is adapted from Eric Williams' poem, "The World is Too Beautiful." The world is too beautiful to be... I'm so sorry.
This poem, it will be in a different language from, I think, everything else you'll hear me sing today. So this is in Gujarati, which comes from the state of Gujarat in India. And I was taught it by a friend when I was there trying to learn Gujarati, and then I learned later that it's a poem that every fifth grader in the state of Gujarat learns as part of their just kind of fifth grade schooling, which I think was kind of a fun little glimpse into childhood. And this poem, the way I interpret it is it's about seeing the divine everywhere, in the mountains, in the stars, in the blooming of flowers, in the call of the birds, and sometimes feeling like the divine might be far away, but it's always there, somewhere, 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 which you'll hear repeated as kyak, kyakane, kyak, somewhere, somewhere, somewhere. Parvat tara pohra khamba sarvar tari aankh he ishwar hu tane jochu kyak kyak ne kyak 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 ne kyak 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 ne kyak Dhanushna rango matu ramira yoraliyat tu taranano taranaharo charanano tunad पर्वत तारा पहड़ा खंभ सरवर तारी आंख हे ईश्वर हूँ तने जोचू क्याक क्याक ने क्याक 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 ने क्याक 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 ने क्याक चंद्र ने तारा आगे अहि आगिया तमरा राध त्राडने लाढनी साथे मोर पिंचना सूर संत कुकरी रमतो रहे न जी कने दूर पर्वत तारा पहड़ा खंभ सरवर तारी आंख हे ईश्वर हूँ तने जोचू क्याक क्याक ने क्याक 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 ने क्याक 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 ने क्याक 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 ने क्याक 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 ने क्याक
The following is adapted from Eric Williams' poem, The World is Too Beautiful. The world is too beautiful to be praised by only one voice. May you have the courage to sing your part. The world is too complex to be understood from a single perspective. May you have the courage to hear many voices. The world is too broken to be healed by only one set of hands. May you have the courage to use your gifts. May you go in peace. And now we will light the chalice. As we light the chalice, say these words with me. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith, the light of truth, and the warmth of love. Come, let us worship together. on the danger of a single story. Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie challenges us to consider the power of stories to influence identity, shape stereotypes, and build paths to empathy. Adichie explores the negative influences that a single story can have. Every culture generates and nurtures stories that justify their economic and political status quo. Stereotypes, for example, are the stories we tell about specific groups of people that justify their cultural status. During the 1990s and early 2000s, when union jobs were ebbing and a gig economy that shrank the middle class was gaining ground, the only image of a working white man we saw on sitcoms was of the lovable but stupid husband and father who relied on his much smarter wife to keep things afloat. It's hard to worry about the loss of good union jobs when the only image we saw of the white working man was that of a comedic idiot. Erase the working man's need to support a family, and you erase sympathy for the loss of solid union jobs. The stereotype of the hyper-violent and hypersexual black man was invented at the moment of the Emancipation Proclamation and has showed up in entertainment, religion, politics, and folk stories ever since. That stereotype did not exist during slavery. That would have suggested to the vast majority of white people that slavery made slaves unhappy, and the images needed to support the status quo during slavery were of happy slaves, not angry ones. But the moment Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, this new image appeared, and it appeared everywhere and has never left us. This image, that of the hyper-violent, hypersexual black man, was designed and nurtured by those who would benefit, and most certainly did benefit, from a terrified white populace and might therefore help garner support for segregation and the terror of Jim Crow policies and practices. Cultural stories, the ones that get told over and over again in any given culture, justify why things are the way things are. Adichie explains how a single story is created. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. She continues, it is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, nkale, that I think about whenever I think about the power structures of the world. Nkale loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are defined by the principle of nkale. How they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent on power. We'd now like to welcome Laura Sue Schlatter up to talk about our Board of Trustees.
I'm not sure exactly how that fits, but so I guess this is not a single story. I have good news and not so good news. Get closer to the mic, Louise is saying. Not a single story. I have good news and not so good news. The good news. Unity is a vibrant, energetic, engaged congregation of well over 850 members. The not so good news. Our deadline for applicants for the board has come and gone, and we didn't even get the minimum of 3 candidates that is needed. So consider this. This is going to be a really exciting year. Did you know, I just realized yesterday in conversation with someone that not everybody knows this, that the executive team comes to all of our meetings. That's a guaranteed 3 hours a month with Laura Park, KP Hong, and our new senior minister, Reverend Oscar Sinclair. And this year, we will be working to craft new end statements and studying and developing a plan to engage in reparations. If you have given board service a thought, go ahead and apply. You'll be getting an email about it later today. The link to the application will be in that email. It's also on the board's webpage. The new deadline is August 16th. Please don't wait till the last minute. My heart can't take it. It's August 16th. And remember, Unity Church needs you.
My apologies for the order there. Summertime, we have lay leaders, and we all just have to make do. Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this church. We take a moment to settle ourselves, to pause, to breathe, to enter a time of meditation, reflection, and prayer, as is your practice. Our human condition includes the truth that on any given Sunday there may be one among us facing cancer, another mourning the loss of a beloved. There may be one among us who is struggling with mental health, and another trying to embody and embrace the spiritual practice of raising children. Someone among us is worried about making ends meet, and another is concerned about a loved one in prison. There may be one among us who has wounded others with their addiction, and one who is celebrating another decade of recovery. There may be one among us who is facing their final days. We support them in this time of transition that requires curiosity, courage, and honesty. We hold in care all these and more as we pray for the peoples of this courageous congregation, and as together we live into our longing to embody and help build the beloved community. We hold close in our prayers Unity Church member Jean Seabury and her mother Rosalind Seabury Collins. Jean traveled to be with her mother, who was moved into hospice this week. Roz was a prolific clay and watercolor artist and a lover of music, animals, children, family, and life. May the journey of these sacred days illuminate all the more Roz's loving and warm spirit in the world. We invite you now to speak aloud the names of those who are on your heart and mind this day. And will you now pray with me? We do not choose when tragedy occurs, nor where, nor what feelings are brought to the surface as we handle this challenge. In this heartbreak that we carry forth is our humanity in newly revealed form, our hearts tender and delicate. Within this complex, hard time, may our hearts be cradled in the balance to strengthen and resolve, and hold fast to the seed of tenderness that allows for the experience of love. May we be comforted in being human, while knowing in its very essence being human is exceedingly difficult. Know that we are not alone. Let us heal and balance together. May we find solace here in the collective human experience and regeneration of affection. May community hold, tend, and comfort us in love. Blessed be, and amen. Betsy and I are going to alternate reading from two different 19th century United States writers and abolitionists, contemporaries of one another. I'll be reading Henry David Thoreau, living near Concord, Massachusetts in the 1840s and 50s. Betsy, Harriet Jacobs, a woman who was enslaved by a prominent physician, Dr. James Norcom, 600 miles south of Thoreau in Edenton, North Carolina. Thoreau went to Walden Pond for a 2-year experiment, studying nature to discover what it had to teach of moral and spiritual truth. Jacobs went into a crawl space above a shed connected to her grandmother's house to escape the promise of perpetual rape by her owner, finally reaching a free state just a few years before Thoreau went to Walden. We are counterposing these two voices to give you a sense of how vastly different their themes, their focus, their stories. Thoreau. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation, unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life.
Jacobs. I now entered on my 15th year, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper foul words in my ear. He tried his utmost to corrupt the pure principles my grandmother had instilled. He peopled my young mind with unclean images, such as only a vile monster could think of. I turned from him with disgust and hatred, but he was my master.
Thoreau. As for clothing, perhaps we are led oftener by a love of novelty and a regard for the opinions of men in procuring it than by a true utility. No man ever stood the lower in my estimation for having a patch on his clothes, yet I am sure there is greater anxiety, commonly, to have fashionable or at least clean and unpatched clothes than to have a sound conscience. We worship not the graces, but fashion. The head monkey at Paris puts on a traveler's cap, and all the monkeys in America do the same.
Jacobs. A small shed had been added to my grandmother's house years ago. Some boards were laid across the joist at the top, and between these boards and the roof was a very small garret, never occupied by anything but rats and mice. It was a pent room, covered with nothing but shingles, according to the Southern custom for such buildings. My Uncle Philip had very skillfully made a concealed trapdoor which communicated with the storeroom. He'd been doing this while I was hiding in the swamp. To this hold I was conveyed. The air was stifling, the darkness total. My garret was only 9 feet long and 7 wide. The highest part was 3 feet high and sloped down abruptly to the loose board floor. There was no admission for either light or air. The rats and mice ran over my bed.
Thoreau. I need solitude. I have come forth to this hill at sunset to see the forms of the mountains and the horizon, to behold and commune with something grander than man. Their mere distance and unprofanedness is an infinite encouragement. It is with infinite yearning and aspiration that I seek solitude.
Jacobs. In slavery, even the little child, who is accustomed to wait on her mistress and her children, will learn before she is 12 years old why it is that her mistress hates such and such a one among the slaves. Perhaps the child's own mother is among those hated ones. She listens to violent outbreaks of jealous passion and cannot help understanding what is its cause. She will become prematurely knowing in evil things. Soon she will learn to tremble when she hears her master's footfall. If God has bestowed beauty upon her, it will prove her greatest curse. That which commands admiration in the white woman only hastens the degradation of the female slave. In view of these things, why are ye silent, ye free men and women of the North? Why do your tongues falter in the maintenance of the right? Would that I had more ability, but my heart is so full and my pen is so weak. There are noble men and women who plead for us, striving to help those who cannot help themselves. God bless them. God give them strength and courage to go on. God bless those everywhere who are laboring to advance the cause of humanity.
This next piece comes from the tradition that I was studying during my master's program, and it's recited during a time of grieving for Shia Muslims, and they're grieving for the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, who died standing up for what he believed was right. Standing up for justice. And one of the things that I think is so beautiful about this tradition is in the poetry that's recited, you don't just recite about Imam Hussein. You can't only understand his story to get the full picture of what happened. You also recite his children's story. You also recite his grandmother's story. So this next piece is telling the story of his grandmother when she was giving birth to Imam Ali, who was Hussein's father. And as this tradition is one of mourning, instruments are typically not used, and instead one person recites and the other people in the space help hold a drone like the Shruti box was doing. So I'm inviting you all to participate in this with me and help me out by just holding an ah, ah. Beautiful. And just keep it going. Breathe when you need to. Take breaks, come back in. I'll tell you when you're done. Hera, he Fatima, ki haram दीवार कह रही है कि बीबी इधर से आए हेरा है फातिमा गैरों को है ये हुक्म जिया तो दर से की बात है चाहे जिधर से आए हेरा है फातिमा Thank you.
Between 1835 and 1847, two writers living 650 miles apart on the East Coast intentionally, dramatically isolated themselves from society. Both would go on to write books detailing those experiences. The two are now buried just 15 miles apart, one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the other in Concord. One of those books, Henry David Thoreau's Walden, would become one of the most influential books of the 19th century. It would go on to become a cornerstone in the Western canon of United States letters and has been swept up into our country's ethos, both in ways Thoreau would have appreciated and in ways he never intended. The other, Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, was not believed to have been written by its author because of the prevalence of the single story that held that a black woman was not capable of writing a book. And it disappeared for over 100 years, rediscovered by historian Jean Fagan Yellen, and finally reprinted as the autobiography it is in 1987. A look at these two experiences of self-isolation, self-reliance, and the national appetite for one story to be told in one specific way in every school in the country for 175 years, and for the other not to be told at all, gives us insights into the dangers of a single story, dangers that contort our history and uphold power in the same hands over and over and over again. In 1845, as we know, Henry David Thoreau went to Walden Pond, near Concord, in Massachusetts. The land was owned by and loaned to him by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It covered 335 acres, inclusive of the 64-acre Walden Pond. To put that into perspective, 335 acres is just over 1/2 square mile, or the space box between Victoria and Dale, and Grand and Selby. The pond itself was very similar in area to Como Lake, though it was much deeper, if you want to get into that, not relevant here. But picture that lake right here where we sit, surrounded by woods, roughly from Victoria to Dale, from Selby to Grand. Thoreau, as we know, went to Walden Pond to practice living by some of the ideals his teacher Emerson was exploring. His experiment thrust him headfirst into the paradox of transcendentalism. His text is both exquisitely focused on place, down to the details of the color of the leaves and the feel of wood planks in his hands, and of no place, as transcendence into a larger awakening requires no place at all. One of the most celebrated themes of Walden Pond is its focus on what Emerson called self-reliance. Self-reliance. Thoreau believes self-reliance meant one must have unfailing trust in one's confidence and one's faculties, choosing individuality over societal conformity, whether in choices of what to wear or how to build one's house or in how one thinks. By leaving society and living in solitude, sort of, Thoreau makes his commitment to self-reliance in order, as he says, to follow the bent of my genius. He stresses the importance of living independently as he builds his own house and lives off his own, if first stolen and then borrowed, land. Thoreau's solo adventure wasn't all that solo, of course. And in 1,000 ways, his sojourn was more theoretical than its myth has suggested. Family and friends brought food. He regularly dined with friends in town, which was very close by. His mother is believed to have done much of his laundry. And he had regular visitors. He had no dependents to care for. And of course, the land he was living on belonged to a friend. Thoreau's individualism, in other words, was made possible by a substantial and tightly woven social safety net. Just 10 years before Thoreau went to Walden Pond to start figuring out where he would build his cabin, a woman named Harriet Jacobs, who was the personal property of a slave owner named Dr. James Norcom in Edenton, North Carolina, climbed a ladder under cover of night and entered a crawl space built over a shed that was connected to her grandmother's house. The crawl space was 9 feet long. It was 7 feet wide. At its highest edge, the crawl space was 3 feet high, and from there, the ceiling sloped down until it met with the floor. She could therefore, and this is a cross-section of that space, it would have been 9 feet deep. She could therefore sit up with her back on the 3-foot wall, but she could not stand. Her only light and fresh air, which weren't there initially, there was no difference between day and night initially, but eventually her light and fresh air came from small bore holes her family drilled for her survival. Jacobs had no protection other than the roof itself from the elements. She had only the light that came through the small holes. The few times she took the risk to come down through the hidden passage under cover of night, her muscles had atrophied and she crumpled to the floor. She was plagued by cold and heat, illnesses that almost took her life several times, the loss of her voice entirely for long stretches, insects, and trauma by isolation. Jacob's sojourn into a crawl space was prompted by her circumstances. She was enslaved to a man who sexually harassed her and promised rape relentlessly. After employing many strategies to avoid the sexual terror of Norcom, with the help of family and friends, both black and white, enslaved and free, she was out of options. Norcom was a prominent physician in Edenton, North Carolina, and his reputation mattered to him, and so being close to a larger community was critical for Jacob's safety. But once Norcom decided to build a house several miles away from town and keep her in it so that he could rape her without his reputation being damaged, Jacobs determined to never meet that fate. And she fled. But since she was unwilling to leave her very young children, also slaves and also owned by Norcom, behind, her flight was into hiding rather than to the north. She fled at first to a swamp. While there, an uncle built a trapdoor between the vestibule and the crawl space. And once it was ready, the family worked under cover of night to get Harriet from the swamp to the crawl space. Harriet Jacobs stayed there in that attic crawl space, almost dying from heat, cold, fire ants, desolation, illness, isolation for 7 years until 1942. Family members brought food, took away slop buckets, and communicated with her when it was safe to do so. Her 2 young children, also slaves, as I said, and also owned by Norcom, lived below her and were being raised by her grandmother. Jacobs listened to them growing up below her, sometimes catching glimpses of them or hearing their voices through the boreholes drilled, but she could never let them know she was there as they were too young to keep her whereabouts secret. A woman laid in an attic crawl space, unprotected from heat, cold ants, listening as her children were raised in the rooms below her, unable even to tell her she was there for 7 years. The book she went on to write after she escaped, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, has one central purpose, and that is to convince readers that slavery is an unchristian, monstrous thing so that they might be sympathetic to the cause of abolition. It is filled with direct appeals to readers, such as, "And now, dear reader, I come to a period in my unhappy life which I would gladly forget if I could. The remembrance fills me with sorrow and shame. It pains me to tell you of it, but I have promised to tell you the truth, and I will do it honestly. Let it cost me what it may." In Walden, Thoreau appeals to readers over and over again to eschew the thoughts of others, to come up with your own. Not to wear what others tell you to wear or build your house in the fashion of other neighbors, but to live and dress and build homes and think in a manner of your own discovery and need. Jacobs, on the other hand, is solely focused on how readers understand her and people like her. Thoreau urges readers to give no care what others think. Jacobs cannot survive in this world unless she can convince others to think differently about her. Thoreau wants nothing to do with others' opinions. Jacobs can focus on nothing else. This wild divergence in theme, this particular aspect of their stories begs the question, who among us can afford the axiom to think and live as we please? And who among us cannot afford this particular form of United States self-reliance, which is eschewing the concerns of others? Without texts like Jacobs, this inequity, one that is fundamental to the experiment of this country, is almost entirely hidden. Thoreau cannot illustrate this point because his life gives him no access to it. Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl is now commonly taught, but its entry to the canon, to that which gets taught and what ignored, to what is considered important work versus that which is considered unimportant, has only come in the last 30 years. For well over 100 years, her story was completely silenced, as if it never existed, and Thoreau's story was printed, reprinted, assigned, preached, studied, heralded, held up in United States literature as a literary classic. Jacobs' story could not exist in the United States imagination, in our collective imagination. Initially, its truth alone would have so deeply violated the common belief that slavery was a kind institution that its existence was unthinkable. An example of a black woman writing her own story, that in itself was a truth our country's imagination could not hold. At the heart of what has been bundled and sold to us and taught as United States literature, until this monofocus was disrupted by scholars who'd learned from the social movements of the 1960s and 70s, was the individual man against the universe, or to give transcendentalists their due, the individual man with the universe. Whether reflected in Herman Melville's Captain Ahab and his maniacal search for his prey without any cares given to the lives of his crew members, whether in the words of Benjamin Franklin, Ernest Hemingway, T.S. Eliot, Hawthorne, James Fenimore Cooper, whether in Emerson and Thoreau's meditations on transcendentalism, the theme of the individual man in the universe was, so the teaching went, the most important theme in American letters. If you went to graduate school and passed your PhD exams, you had to follow that thread through all these writers, knowing that anyone who wasn't on that river of that theme was othered. Not in the book, but handed out by mimeograph, for example. Every text was measured insofar as it measured up to that standard, and those that cared not for this theme were relegated to the flotsam and jetsam of United States letters, ignored, unprinted, stashed in archives, relegated to the level of advertisement. The national appetite for literature wanted only this one story, and so we printed and sold and preached and studied and taught those texts in a vacuum. You might think that if this country's appetite for the narrative of individualism and self-reliance has been our most voracious, then Jacobs' autobiography would surely have been a cornerstone of American letters all this time. I know of no more remarkable story of individual survival against all odds, including the survival of the spirit. But our culture's favorite narrative has never been about self-reliance per se. In fact, slavery continued as long as it did because of how carefully those in power nurtured the single story that held that Black Americans could not survive, were not self-reliant, could not survive on their own. Self-reliance didn't belong to anyone other than white, mostly propertied men, who were the only people with autonomy and a seat at the table of civic life. Our country's appetite for self-reliance has always been deeply necessary, but only insofar as it upholds those in power as having earned it, a system that nurtures their status, the systems that nurture their status be damned. That's the thing. That narrative that those that are in power are there because they've earned it, because they alone can take on the world, is critically necessary for justifying institutions that have never been designed to create a fair playing field. And it is this thesis that bids us ever look away from justice, from injustice. It is the story that tells us 1,000 times a day that those in power have it because they earned it, because they worked harder than everybody else. And it has been, since the moment Europeans landed on this continent, the most audacious fiction imaginable. This sermon holds up only one of a million examples, and of course, to dig back further, we would take a look at who had access to literacy and the luxury of time to think and to write and to publish. Access that has been limited throughout history of the West to those who have shaped our stories. Let us, therefore, never fall into the trap that believing that any given text, no matter how celebrated, is more important than others of its day because it has withstood the test of time. When at a museum, when reading art history, when considering what literature, what music, what fine art, what sacred texts we have that have been considered the most important so long that they have become a single story, let us always ask, who benefits from this single story? What stories are deliberately removed from our vision so that we never learn to see differently? What are we being asked not to see? Where might there be stories that our collective imagination has not been able to hold? And how do we humble ourselves to see them? And let us be courageous in looking into the cracks and the waysides to find those stories, for in them, I believe, lies the collective mirror that we must have if we are to build a better world. Let it be so.
Unity Church is framed by statements of conscience known as its end statements. One of those is generously give and openly receive compassionate care in times of joy, sorrow, and frustration. Our compassionate care extends beyond the walls of this church to communities with whom we share a common interest. Each week, the larger portion of our offering goes to our community partners, and this week, the recipient is LEAP Pediatric and Adolescent Care. LEAP Pediatric and Adolescent Care is an innovative, community-based clinic 2 miles northwest of Unity Church. Its mission is to advance healthcare equity and remove barriers to total child well-being by integrating families into the fabric of local wellness opportunities. LEAP works with a 3-pronged outreach: direct healthcare, health counseling, and collaboration with community-based public health. This collection will be used to cover unreimbursed care for patients who have limited health insurance or other means to pay. Will the ushers please come forward? May the work of our hands and the generosity of our hearts be given in gratitude this day. Let the offering now be taken.
This piece is a mashup of a Bollywood lullaby from the 1960s and an American folk song that my mom sang to me as a lullaby when I was a baby. Nanhi kali sone chali hava dheere aana neend bhare pankh liye jhula jhula janna chand kiran si guriya na jo ki hai pali aaj agar chandaniya aana meri gali gun 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 geet khoy hole hole gana neend bhare pankh liye jhula jhula jana Ashabai, don't you cry. Go to sleep, my little baby. When you wake, you shall have all the pretty little horses. Ah, Resham ki Jula, Jula, Jana. Jula, Jula, Jana.
Good morning, everyone. Before we sing the last hymn, I'd like to introduce it a little bit, give you a little context. So if you take your hymnals and turn to hymn 181, which is no matter if you live now far or near. So the 10 hymns between 176 and 186, they're kind of like the dark corner of your hymnal. They are words from sacred traditions and music of the cultures of the world. They're the hymns that UU congregations almost never sing. Because some of them are in languages that are not in English, and they're presented with no translation or context. They're just there. And some of them are melodies that are unfamiliar or rhythms that are unfamiliar. They're tricky to follow. And the thing is, the hymns we sing, when we're constantly singing the same hymns and avoiding this batch of hymns, they also tell one story, right? They tell the story of we're just like the other churches, we just don't say the word God. They're still the same old hymns, those slains and hifriddles, the old Lutheran hymns with the words changed. The thing is, though, these hymns tell some really striking stories that push back against the idea of the UU church being the church of white affluent lefties. So if you look at these hymns, yes, some of them, for example, 180 Alhamdulillah, it is presented as some sort of a traditional Middle Eastern song, but it's actually written by a white dude from the 1960s in San Francisco. But the hymn right before it, 179, that is a hymn of the first Unitarian church in Africa, in Lagos, Nigeria. If you go to hymn 182, Oh, the Beauty in a Life, that is a hymn of the first UU church in Manila, in the Philippines. So the hymn we're going to sing right now, no matter if you live now far or near, the text, it says Sutta no Pata, which is not a thing. I don't know where they came up with that. But this is a rough translation of a Hindu text from about 800 years before Christ. And, the words, there is not one alive we count outside. They're pretty Unitarian, I think. The melody is credited as Old Indian Song, which it might be. I haven't found a song that is exactly that, but if you had heard it, you would have heard it kind of like what Alia has been doing today, probably over a drone, probably long phrases out of a strict time signature. This version, though, was taken by a Western composer, Friedrich Matthau, and sort of straitjacketed a little bit. So we've added some blocky harmonies, and so you can sing it, and we've added a nice 2/4 rhythm to it. But still a great song, it's still a great tune and text, but it is unfamiliar. So if you can read sheet music or pick up a tune, I encourage you to sing out confidently so you can help out those that are a little bit more insecure. So here we go.
Hush. Somebody is calling your name. Can you hear it? Calling you to a past not quite forgotten. Calling us to a future not fully imagined. Hush. Hush. Somebody is calling our name. What shall we do? Please join me in the unison reading. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
And this last piece is sung famously by Farida Khanum, and it's another Bollywood piece that says, "Please don't leave tonight, just stay one more night." Aaj jaane ki zidd na karo.
उम्र भर न light on.